this past weekend was the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Malcolm X. And it's worth, I think, there was a great piece by Laith Saoud, who wrote for the Dean's Report, where he talked about these two different ways of looking at how Malcolm X plays out in modern politics. And one thing that's really important, that a number of things have pointed out, that while there was obviously this broad tradition of civil rights and economic justice, which Malcolm X was very much involved from a very different perspective, and that was exemplified by Martin Luther King Jr., exemplified by the Civil Rights Movement, which was also absolutely an economic rights movement, anti-war movement. But there was also, and particularly I think in some respects with Malcolm X having a power base and being really of Harlem and of New York, where, the actual it wasn't legally Jim Crow in New York. It wasn't legally the same structure in the Northeast and in the industrial Midwest, but the what was in reality racial apartheid was absolutely in effect through housing policies, through cultural policies, and through prison and policing, which of course was in the South too, but that was part of the same apparatus. But we saw it was in a way more explicit in a place like New York because a lot of other things weren't as legally explicit. They obviously were culturally, politically, and in terms of economics. But so we have Black Lives Matter right now. We're finally having a conversation about systemic police violence and brutality targeting Black communities, and the connection between the prison industrial complex and Black autonomy, Black civil rights. Malcolm X was the sort of seminal thinker on that. So that's one way in which we got to look at his legacy. The other thing is the way he kind of, still reverberates in culture. I mean, rap music is a really obvious example that Laith Saoud points out. And, they would put his speeches to, records in the 60s, and it worked. I mean, the speech patterns, the inflections, the way of going about things, and the obvious kind of stylistic and influence on rap music with a more sort of political bent. So it's there too. And then obviously Spike Lee's movie was very important and very successful. The third lens to look at it is, I think, you got to talk about the Islamic lens. And one of the reasons I have such a problem with Islamophobia is because, particularly in an American context, Islam, and not just through the Nation of Islam, because of course Malcolm X broke from the Nation of Islam, became an Orthodox Muslim, quote unquote Orthodox Muslim. Islam is connected with a quest for Black autonomy and civil rights in an American context. And Africa is the highest Muslim population in the world. It's not the Arab Middle East. It's actually the continent of Africa. So that connection of Islam with anti-colonialist politics, of Islam with civil rights, of Islam with distinct cultural expression is important. And what Laith Saoud points out is that Malcolm X, who certainly saw Islam as reflecting his humanism, reflecting his anti-colonialism, reflecting his quest for genuine racial equality, would he be smeared today by this ISIS brush that gets thrown at everybody, that demonizes Islam? And again, the issue is not justifying. If you want to get deep into it and actually know what you're talking about, you can have a very rigorous critique of ISIS that includes what they believe, because what they believe is a huge problem. But if you collapse all of Islam into it, you're not just being inaccurate. You're excluding this whole other really important tradition and other ways that Islam manifests, not just in other parts of the world, but here. And Malcolm X is a really important representative of that. So I would just recommend that everybody check out, there's the autobiography. It's a classic book. I've read that a couple of times, but Manning Marable wrote a more, critical, really like academic study of Malcolm X, which complicates a lot of his self-myths and a lot of his stories. That's really worth looking at. That's a great piece of scholarship, which is really, really respectful, but also much more, thorough. And so, anyways, I just think that's worth mentioning because this is obviously a very, very important American figure and one that has not settled yet into this kind of generic. We know that we strip away MLK of his radicalism. We know that even with the Kennedys have a more radical legacy in some respects than is acknowledged. But Malcolm X is still on the fringes because he can't as easily be whitewashed. And it's important to kind of push him into the center because it's an important historical figure.